Let's give it up for Nick Brown, everybody.
Awesome. So I have the pleasure of introducing JP, who is the founder and CEO of Waste Farmers. They are a 9-year-old company, which is actually a huge accomplishment for many companies since a lot of companies die early. And JP has been named as 50 for the Future by Colorado Statesman, Denver Business Journal's 40 Under 40, and also Top of the Town Environmentalist by 5280. And his company focuses on sustainable solutions to food shortages, and they also have several products that they sell that are fertilizer and high-quality soil. And in 2016, they posted over $2 million of revenue, so clearly he's doing something right, and that's with 20% and 40% margins. So we're really looking forward to learning more about JP's vision and his story. So let's kick it off. JP, tell us about the genesis of Waste Farmers.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It was inspiring to hear your story, and hopefully, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to hear everyone's story, but excited to share mine in the event that it can be of some benefit and some help of at least what not to do. I'm kidding.
Can everybody hear JP all right?
But I think the genesis for Waste Farmers was not a singular event. It was an intuitive belief that there are these macro factors colliding that are going to reshape the way that we live by necessity and then through opportunity. So necessity, in my opinion, being the existential threat of climate change and increasing population and natural resources. And then, by design or some of the things that are coming from another direction is technology and what that's enabling. And it's all to say that there's this inflection point that we are at. And when we started in 2009, it was with that belief of this inflection point, and that still remains, sort of to this day of we don't know exactly what the world's going to look like, but we're excited to design an organism, which is the way we view sort of our collection of passionate people, that is Waste Farmers. How can we design that to be a part of influencing and designing this change over time?
Awesome. So Mark Cuban said that all entrepreneurs are solving problems at their core. And so what is that core problem that you all are solving?
So our purpose statement is we are cosmic journey people seeking solutions inspired by natural systems, human potential, and intuitive imagination with the intention of enhancing the biosphere, local communities, and one's authentic life. It's a big statement, and it's very ethereal, and then by design, unattainable in the absolute. We just became an evergreen company, which means that we're building for 100 years. Like, we want to be here in 100 plus years. So at 9 years in, we're 9% of our goal. And designing like that takes, sort of a discipline in what we call an opposable mind, being able to take two opposing ideas and hold them in the same place and not go insane. Or said differently, embracing the word "and" instead of "or." So meaning, like, we can be profitable, focused on the near term, and build for the long term. And so in terms of the problem that we seek to solve, I think for me, entrepreneurialism, and particularly being in a company that, like, not only sort of burning the boats to start it, but also burning the boats to leave it. Does that make sense? In terms of, like, there's no end. Like, how do you build something without an end? How do you, and so, in terms of that problem, like, this process has been sort of, in Buddhism we talk about, like, dharma, like, it's been, for me, my dharma, like, it's exposed me personally, getting back to the purpose statement of like one's authentic life, it's exposed me to things about myself that I couldn't hide from, that have helped me to grow. And I think, you know, part of the problems that exist are so overwhelming from like the broader parts that we're trying to change, that sometimes like just changing sort of the self has a ripple effect. And so while we're focused on big macro problems as a collection, like individually, what we're trying to design is for that company to be this platform for people to grow as individuals as well.
Fantastic. So I feel like we have now touched on, you know, your clouds, and one of my favorite entrepreneurs is Gary Vaynerchuk. He talks a lot about being in the clouds and also being in the dirt. So I think it's a natural segue that we start talking about what are those core products that you all are selling to fulfill your mission?
Sure. So there's two things, and this is why I've really like, I've stopped like even embracing the word entrepreneur because I feel like it's gotten stolen by the venture capital realm and frankly the startup community, because like I think that we reduce, it's like the first thing we ask as Americans to people is, what do you do? It's like the first question that comes up is because we like to reduce things to their smallest parts, and then we try to like understand shit that we actually really can't understand. Like we try to like, that's as like a species, like try to understand things that we actually really have no clue about. And so I'm trying to like, how do we design to really feel comfortable with not having any idea actually about much? And so like in terms of products, like in that startup realm and the entrepreneurial realm and venture capital, they want to know what you do, because products like have a life cycle that go up and they come down. Like, so it's an upside down U. And if I'm a financier or investor, I want to know that because I put it in early, and then at some point on the curve, if I define you by your product, I want you to sell it, you know, before it goes down. I think given that 9 out of 10 companies fail, we might want to look at that shitty metric and sort of rethink it. But I'm not a mathematician, but I think that's a bad metric. But and so in that, if we take that paradigm, in the common wisdom now is, you know, the company's a vehicle for the products and services, and I think that's BS. I think, you know, the products and services are the vehicle for the company, and so we started out recycling. Because I didn't have any money. I had $9,000 in my IRA, and what broadly speaking was like, sustainability is a really important thing. Climate change is a really important thing. What can we do right now with the money we have? And so people would call us a recycling company, and I was like, that's what we're doing. That's not who we are. That's not why we exist. Then we moved into composting. Built that in the largest in the city. And actually I remember specifically a morning at Snooze, and Adam and his brother have become good friends. They were one of our first customers when we composted, but I was out in my overalls picking up a maggot-filled compost bin, and Eric Matisik, who started, he's a friend, and he started Startup Week. This is before he started Startup Week, and I think he helped start this probably. Is that right? Wonderful, wonderful dude. But this is before all that, and like, I'm like picking up a maggot-filled compost bin, and then he's walking in like his suit to go have like this like, you know, network breakfast. Yeah, I was like, he's like, hey man, I was like, hey. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, this is ridiculous. And so, you know, just like moments like that still sort of exist to this day. And then we evolved, and I think not having this, like, when you have this idea of like, we are a film company, like Kodak, like that's what we are. It's like, cool, until film no longer exists, then what are you? And so like, it's more, why are you? And like, not to borrow on Simon Sinek and so forth, but like truly that is, you know. And so I think the most important product that we have, and the thing that I work on most, is like, how do I design an organism that can hold those opposing ideas, you know, at once? And I think it's particularly a Western ideal to be able to reduce things. Like, how do we operate in there? And then how do we stay laser focused? And so the products that are kind of driving business right now is like in 2009, we recognized that, or 2010, we recognized cannabis was a big opportunity, and that, you know, for the longer term picture of what we think, like agriculture is a big piece of the puzzle, both in contributing to climate change and then addressing climate change. And so it was kind of looking at, and I was quoted in Forbes as saying, like, I think cannabis can be to agriculture what technology, or what pornography was to technology. In the sense of, like, it's something that, like, it's a fast-growing thing that can attract capital and sort of bring technologies that can change it. And so we recognize, like, okay, this is something that's going to make a lot of money near term. There's opportunities to service it, but it also is consistent with what our longer term values are and might have some sort of capability that we can build in to do something longer term. And so we make soil and, you know, sort of fertilizers for that industry. And to give you perspective, one of my mentors is the former CEO of OtterBox, and they make protective casings for cell phones and electronics. And I asked them, like, they grew pretty rapidly. And I was like, were you surprised at the rate of growth that you had? And he said, no, like, there's more subscribers to China Mobile than there are people in the US. Like, we were pretty confident that and so same sort of idea, like, they knew that they had their technology, for every phone, they could cover it with their protective technology. And so for us, cannabis then was, you know, sort of $1 billion. It's at $6 billion now, going to grow to 20 plus. We know that every plant grown is an opportunity for us to protect it with our protective technology.
Awesome. And so the two products are the Brand 64 and then Maxfield. So what are the differences between those two products and what makes them unique?
So the intention behind it, like, so Maxfield's was more, like, I think down the road, taking food out of the industrial system would be, like, the best possible place. Taking it even sort of out of, like, either way. Because
of the higher productivity that gardens produce rather than industrial farming?
Yeah, I think industrial farming was designed to, number one, produce a lot of food. And then number two, what's overlooked is, like, it was done to produce productive labor so that labor could go into the workforce. And I think that's, you know, that need was the need of the economy of the past. I don't know that it'll be the need of the economy of the future. And so it wasn't because that was the most efficient way, like, that was the best way to grow food or the best way to feed people. It was just that, like, that just sort of, they co-evolved together. But I think because of the limitations of natural resources and climate change and what that does to something at the mercy of the elements, that's not the most efficient system moving forward. And what I believe is, I'm very confident, like, the data is here, like, you can grow enough for a family of 4 on a quarter of an acre. Instead of looking at a spot in terms of, like, yield, it's an algorithm of, like, space and nutrition efficiency, and so you can do it. It's just really complex. And so, you know, I think in time, that complexity can be overcome, and eventually we'll be growing food at home, maybe some point down the road. And so Maxfield is intended to be, like, a first foray into getting people to grow food at home. That's what we're really passionate about. Cannabis?
Yeah, and there are three different levels, right, of Maxfields. There's, like, the beginner level, then, like, the intermediate, and the expert, right? And that's soil or fertilizer?
Soil.
It's soil. Oh, okay, cool. And it's just, like, nutrient dense. My dad's a farmer, and he grows tomatoes and beans, but especially tomatoes. And he just loves it and is obsessed with it. So, like, why would he want to use Maxfields?
I don't know. I don't know. We didn't really care. With that brand, honestly, we didn't really care. That was more of, like, a statement of the world we wanted to create. Soils, like bag soil products sold through Lowe's and Whole Foods, just is not the way to get there. And so, like, that brand actually, we're not selling that or producing it too much anymore. It was just it was a start, and it was like, let's try it. But I have no idea. And frankly, I don't really care what gardeners want to do. That's not what we got into it. And we're like, we could make an organic gardening brand, and we're like, do we care? No.
Okay.
So we just, yeah.
So I'm having trouble reconciling your big mission and then not. And so who is the target customer for Maxfields?
For Maxfields?
Yeah.
It was the urban farmer, but that's a really small population.
Okay.
But then the channels that are out there, like Lowe's and Big Box, it's gardeners.
Got it.
And so we were in Lowe's, and they're like, you need to do this, this, and this to sell. And we're like, We don't care about that.
Okay, and so is that where Brand 64 came
Brand
into play?
64 came about in 2014.
Okay.
After the passage of Amendment 64.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so that one, we're like, okay, this makes sense. So in the near term, focus efforts on this as it relates to that, from an ROI perspective. We can, so if you're familiar with like Berkshire Hathaway, are you guys familiar with Berkshire Hathaway? Mm-hmm. One of the things, it's Warren Buffett, it's a holding company. And so the holding company has interest in a bunch of different companies, and they don't actually operate them. But in addition to the float the cash flow that they get from insurance, one of the brands that they own is like See's Candy. And what they liked about See's Candy was that it's very CapEx efficient, and would produce consistent cash flow. For us, that's what we like about soil business, is that it produces consistent cash flow, it's very CapEx efficient, and allows us to produce cash flow to invest into other things. And so when you're starting from the ground up, and you're starting during the peak of startup mania, people are like, wait, you're not your product? And so if I'm being intentionally vague about answering your question, it's by design, because that's not what Waste Farmers is. That's what I'm CEO of. And our customers at Batch 64 know exactly what that brand is intended to do. And I think that what Waste Farmers, sort of customers are people in the workforce, people that are, the brightest minds that can help design and tackle some, big problems, and people that recognize that we're stronger together than sort of apart. So I think the ultimate quote unquote product that we're creating is the company itself.
That makes sense. Okay, so you're using Batch 64 and other products to drive innovation in the workforce and in the areas that you care about.
Just to build capabilities, like we got to make money. Yeah. First and foremost, so Batch 64 is an opportunity to, if you take out the concept of, okay, we're one product and the life cycle is this, how do you build continual growth? Well, there's one life cycle that's here, and before that hits there,
you're starting
building
another
the
life
next,
cycle.
and you're building the
Cool.
next, and you're building and working this way. So you're thinking about the big ideas that are pumping into, and this is nothing new for us. While we were composting, or while we were recycling and driving around, we were dealing with cannabis growers back in 2009, and we were composting their soil, and we're like, man, you guys go through a lot of this. What is this? And they're like, well, it's, this soil. So we're like, cool, we're gonna reverse engineer it, we're gonna design our own. And then as, the composting business built up, we started building up revenue in soil. We sold the composting business, bought out certain investors, invested into soil, and built this. So it's nothing nothing new.
That's starting to make sense. So really, I think you have a completely different mindset to entrepreneurship than I would say what the common day is. And one of the things that you wrote in your recent stakeholder letter is that you're building a company to last for 100 years. Yep. And you just stated that. So essentially, your company right now is 9 years old. It's really still in its childhood because you're thinking about a much broader mission that you establish. And now you have these products that are building on top of each other in order to accomplish that mission. So tell us a little bit about the importance of a long-term mindset. I mean, I know Jeff Bezos, for one, thinks only in the long term, and that's what he thinks about. And then reconciling that with the fact that a lot of entrepreneurship now is, I'm going to build a product, I'm going to get capital behind it, I'm going to sell it within a year, and I'm going to cash out.
Yeah, I think, so there's a lot to that. I think, I saw something recently. So number one, and I wrote about this, but I think it's like, what the hell is his name? Brad Feld up in Boulder. He has an autographed picture in the bathroom here. I find that so bizarre. Not the fact that it's in the bathroom,
But the fact that Brad Feld has autographed.
An investor is, the fact that an investor is famous baffles me. That's what's wrong with entrepreneurship right now. And he seems like a nice guy, but what the hell, I think for me it's the equivalent of you go into a restaurant, you buy a dinner, and you're like, this is really good. What financing did you use? And they're like, what? I went to chef school. What finance? Who gives a shit? And I think that like we've worked this whole economy around finance, and then I saw something like Peter Thiel told how to create the ultimate pitch deck. Anyone who's entrepreneurial would be like, fuck you, don't tell me what to do. And so I think that entrepreneurial, excuse my language, by the way, I'm sorry, but it'd be like so I think it's actually the high achievers that would have not we need all kinds, but would have gone to the great schools and the public accounting firms who are now quote unquote entrepreneurs. And I think it's really I disagree with what that actually is. I think it's the same shit, different day. And the problem that exists from that is 6% of companies generate 50% of the profits in the U.S. From an economic perspective, that is not good to have that level of concentration. If this were Eastern medicine, and we were to talk about it like qi, we would recognize that blockage as sickness, cancer, perhaps, something. And so I think that part of the reason that exists is because companies stopped innovating and designing for the long term, because it's hard to do this. And what they do, and the gap that venture capital and all this stuff filled was like, cool, we'll do the outsourced R&D for you for a pretty penny, and then you guys can buy it. But what happens is, in addition to the 6% of companies generating 50% of profit, 62 people own as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. And I think that there is a correlation between, sort of this flow of capital and really designing everything around capital. When Peter Thiel says, this is how I want to see, your plans, it's like, why do we even care what you think? Right. Why should we care what you think? You are the least important leg on this stool, and you've got an outsized opinion. And so what if we take you out and stop trying to build based around your short-sightedness? And when you do that, people say, well, that's great. You're building like Chris Onan. I almost got in a fight with him. I love him to death. But at Galvanized.
Who's that? Who's Chris?
He's the greatest human being on the planet. Truly, I love him to death. We disagree entirely on the economy. But if there was somebody in a foxhole, and I would say this to his face, that's who I'd want. Loyal, genuine. But we're opposite sides of the spectrum.
Opposites. Yeah, sure.
But when he looked at our company, he's like, you are a soil company. Cute, that's a lifestyle company. Great. And I'm like, no, so because I wanted to build for the long term. So then building for the long term becomes a hobby company and a lifestyle company. And then the response then is okay, so just self-fund. So you don't need outside money, just self-fund, because other companies that are going to sell, they need all the capital. And it's like, well, why don't we just change capital and the way that flows? Instead of I think that this is going to start shifting in this direction. I do fundamentally believe that this discussion that has been very much, and it's in our value statement, an intuitive this doesn't feel right. I don't know exactly how to articulate it, but it just doesn't feel right. It's starting to you're getting data that says it's feeling more and more we're moving in the right direction. But I think that there's going to be a pushback against the startup mentality. I can guarantee it, and you're probably already sensing it. I don't know. Interesting.
Okay. And one of the things you mentioned was about how huge companies are buying these smaller companies that are essentially the innovative companies that are creating new developments in the space. And that goes back to Innovator's Dilemma, which is this book by a Harvard professor named Clayton Christensen. And it's on the bookshelves of a lot of those really big companies' founders that you discussed. And I looked at some of your top books and that you had on that list, The E-Myth and The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Will you give us a rundown of some of your favorite books? I think it's going to be really beneficial for the people in this room. I just heard this great talk from Ev Williams of Twitter, and all he did during this talk was just talk about his 6 favorite books, and he brought out some excerpts from them. I don't expect you to recite any excerpts from your top books unless you can, but what are your top books and why?
A lot of these I wish I had had early on, because I just, even still, like, there's a lot of blank stares and a lot of like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And not in it, with all due respect, like, I finally don't give a shit. But I think the thing is, like Built to Last was something that I wish I would have had early on. Because I was like, you're saying everything that I've been saying for the past 5 years and didn't know how to
Who's the author on that?
Jim Collins.
And he did Good to Great, too,
And he did Good to Great, which is okay. And then The Alchemy of Growth is a book I really like, because it sort of outlines what's called the 3 Horizons model and how you build enduring growth. I think Corporate Life Cycles is something that's really intriguing, because, for me, I started as a founder and then grew into the CEO, and I sort of grew up in the company, so I didn't really have any reference of like, is this normal? It's like puberty as a kid. You're like, is this like, well, how do I do this? Like, are these dreams normal? Like, what happens? Corporate life cycles, like, yeah, in the beginning, you're very opportunistic in sales, and then as a certain thing grows, you become very strategic. And it's like, oh, okay, we're normal. Like, I don't know if that's going to change anything, but at least it's nice to know that we're not crazy. So that's a good one from that perspective. The Hard Thing About Hard Things was a really good one, because, every 6 months, you go through this feeling of like, I give up. Like, this sucks. I
feel that.
Hate life.
Yep.
I hate people.
I don't know about that.
Hate, pretty much, everything about anything. And then you're just like, this is so hard. And then you're like, I deserve, this is like, I've worked hard. Like, I deserve it not to be hard anymore. And I quit. And basically, the book is just no shit. Like, what did you expect? Like, if it was easy, everyone would do it, and no one cares that you're having a hard time. And it's like, oh, okay. Guess I should probably figure it out. So I think that was a really good one, and it came at the right time. Like, I like that one, sort of like brought me to tears. Like, and then the thing about like being CEO and again, the CEO talking to you right now is peacetime CEO. Everything's great.
Right.
But when shit hits the fan, I don't give a shit about the future. Like, all I care about is the soil business that we're in and the margins that we have. And if something's fucked up, I want it fixed.
Totally.
Because I don't, like, the future can't happen. And so, like, even just like, I was like, man, I feel like 2 different people. Like, and then like him sort of explaining these things and having sort of this, okay, I'm not crazy. I mean, in this respect.
Yeah, those 2 things can totally coexist at the same time. And we're going to open it up for questions in just a second here. So think of what you want to ask JP. And what's one takeaway that everybody in this room can walk out of here with?
I think one takeaway is that, you're not your products, you're not your funding, you're not, I think that the desire to know everything and to control everything is something that is a complete illusion. And I think being comfortable in uncomfortable things is a lesson that transcends, sort of business, and is beneficial for, I think, us as a species. And then, a broader takeaway would be like, and it's even to borrow off of the gentleman's autograph photo in the bathroom of like building startup communities, is like, I'd like to see us building communities, like, and that's where joining the Evergreen sort of institute, becoming an Evergreen company was like, okay, that, and we're also a B Corp, was like, okay, I think we found our tribe of people who are speaking our language. And so, and it's not to say like, this is not to discount, like, I don't mean to sort of speak in extremes, like, we do need like this ecosystem of being able to fund really big ideas that might exist out of a company's ability to sort of innovate. Like, it's not to say that like it's not important to have these ways to fund technological product innovation in this way. It's just to say that I think we've told the stories of like the exceptions rather than the rules, and those have become sort of the norm, and they've guided a lot of investment and attention in a certain direction. I think we need to kind of swing back towards normalcy and redefine what's important.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really illuminating discussion, and it's really great to speak with someone who has a completely different mindset versus the conventional wisdom and the modern day knowledge that is often circulated about entrepreneurship. So if we could all just give it up for JP. And now we're ready to take some questions. We have one over here from Julie. Cool. So this is Julie from Know It Out Loud. And if everybody can say their name and their company name or something along those lines, if maybe your employer.
Thank you, Nick. I'm Julie Chiron, and my company is Know It Out Loud. I work with universities on academic research. So I have a question. What does it mean to you to be laser focused when your company is sort of slightly abstract or more broad and always changing?
That's a really good question. I think that, I want Waste Farmers itself to, so I'm also in a band, and so as a side note, we're in a competition right now. It's so I forgot, I have to do this. Will you please go to text CTR to 555-888 and vote for us? I need to do this. 555-888 and vote for the band. It's a national competition, and we're really close, so sorry.
I might just tweet that out.
Yeah. 555-888 CTR. Please tweet it. Yeah. Thank you. But so I want Waste Farmers to feel like Meow Wolf. I want it to be the expression of an artist, and I don't want institutional money to touch that unless they understand it, and I don't ever want that to change. And so Waste Farmers itself is sort of like Berkshire Hathaway, Google X. It's innovating ideas, and then it's probably going to be buying and acquiring things over time. Now, in the innovation side, that would be Horizon 3. Ideas, you're managing that very differently. So if you think about Google X, it's a separate entity, and it's managed very differently from AdWords and things like this. So this side, it's the more restrictions you put on that, it just takes a different form of management. So in Horizon 3, that management is very different. When it moves to Horizon 2, that management is very different. In Horizon 1, which is where our core products are, which would be where soil is, that's where you get things like OKRs, management by objectives, budgets, StratOp is a process that we use that came from one of Peter Drucker's contemporaries that it's strategy and operations. That's how we get the language of, we get StratOp into OKRs, and then we manage through teal management, and which I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but sort of decentralized decision making. So to answer your question, by creating these compartments, which I got from Alchemy of Growth, I was like, okay, and now it's like Paul Tamburello, who's the godfather of the Highlands. I remember him talking about the guitar has 6 strings, so there's structure, but that structure itself has created some of the greatest creativity that exists. And so before it was kind of just a shit show, and it's the same shit show, but it's sort of compartmentalized, and so you're able to say okay, I can talk about this over here, I can talk about this over here and this over here. And so very diligent things that you would see sort of in managing in any big company of KPIs, OKRs, those exist here in the core products, if that makes sense.
I got a question. Jesse Schuler, assistant manager here at the Commons. I'm curious to know about your team. What type of talent do you have, and what is some special qualities that you really admire about your team? Because I just imagine that you have very dynamic people on your team, but I don't want to imagine. I want to kind of hear some details about who the building blocks are of your team.
I think that, it's taken like it's taken special people, especially initially, to be able to so if you're to take the break out of like the core, then sort of the transitional, and then what they call moonshots, it's like 70% of the company's resources, 20% and 10%. So I've always represented that 10%, and that's the only place my mind can operate. It's probably where it's best operating. But then you have people that are like, and there's no layers to the company, right? And it's like 3 people. They're like, I hear that, but I have a lot of things I have to do right now so that we don't go out of business. And so it's been special people that have been able to sort of like, okay, got it, but we're gonna focus on this right now. I think as things that move into core one, sort of like as soil is taken and gone from like, here's something we could test, let's pilot that, and then let's scale that. You have different personalities that are very good for certain sides. And what's been intriguing is, before having that way of thinking about things, it would be, okay, develop it, and then you move down with the process with it. And so you have a bunch of people that like should be thinking about big ideas, managing like and executing day to day. And we're like, I think in a traditional company, it's like, you get better at that, and if you can't get better at that, you go. But it's like, okay, actually, you shouldn't do anything here, stay up here, and then let's like, sort of keep going there, like keep on going there. And I think the longevity of people has been, feeling connected to a broader mission, feeling connected to building something special from a company perspective, and then sort of the products being the means to the end to sort of get there. But it's intriguing, it's not changing, but I think that like we're moving to this place where we're having to hire for specialized things, which we've never had to do, which is a different exercise for us. But then how do you exercise, like how do you have somebody come in and do specialized things, but then, in the context of like something bigger, something, So I'm not the best person to answer that question either. But like the thing that I recognized was, I am a terrible manager. I want teal management as a system that we can implement. And then within that, we need people, which gets back to the E-myth, like there's entrepreneurs and then sort of technical and then managerial, like just recognizing like sort of that certain people are certain.
So you kind of categorize yourself as leader, not necessarily manager?
Yeah. I don't really know. I'm leader, I think, in the Taoist way of like, the way like my leadership philosophy is like in the Tao, they're like, when the leader's done, the people say we did it all on our own. Like that's not in sort of the way of like, rah, like, not my way, no.
Hey, I'm Ira. How you doing? Ira Coleman. Something that was profound to me is authenticity and who you are and what you're about. And there's no doubt that a lot of people can feel that in this room. You've been in business 9 years, you said? Mm-hmm. How did you get to this point of not giving a shit, but yet truly giving a shit? Like, it's your ability to be able to speak about that and show kind in those words without really offending anyone, and hopefully no one was offended by that. But how long did it take to get to that point of self-reflection to be able to, share that with others?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I appreciate that. I think on the website, Stephen Grace is a phenomenal writer, and it ended up becoming like a book about the local food movement here called Grow. But he talks about this time like where I was in New York City and we just lost the I4C campaign, which is and Onan would have beat the hell out of me. Like, I'm not very tough. So thankfully we didn't go to blows, but like I was like, we should have won that. We didn't. That was like my last straw. It was this sort of, it was back in 2012. It was like a competition. It was like an impact thing, like competition for funding. And I went to New York City, and my cousin was like, you gotta, like, I love you, man, and I would give you money, but like, and me not giving you money is not because I don't believe in you, but he's like, I'm scared that you're going down a path that you're not gonna be able to come back from, and so like, I'm not gonna give you any money. And we needed money desperately. And so I kind of walked around New York City, and I was like, I'm gonna go back home empty-handed, and I'm done. And they were like, I had a train ticket to Washington, D.C. in my pocket where we would go meet with, sort of a group that was very inspiring. And we continued to meet, and they just said, you're not giving up. Like, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk to these people. But I almost didn't get on that train. It's sort of like a last split-second decision of like, might as well try it. And I think that like, in that, you sort of, every day, and like, in Buddhism, which is like indirectly, I guess, what I've sort of become, there's this concept like of meditating on the concept of dying, or like it sounds morbid, but it's just like when you sort of die and then each day reborn, I think the tendency to hold on to who you were is very much like sort of less, and I think that holding that from a philosophy perspective, thinking about that through sort of a meditation perspective, and then living that in practice, I think it's just been, and that's why I say like, this has been my dharma. Like, you can't hide from it. Like, it's so visceral, it's very real. Like, this is a reality that I've created, right? And the choices I've made have led me here, and whatever they are, the choices that are made don't allow for, me to escape any sort of like, facing exactly what's in front of me. Like, there's no place for me to repress. Like, I guess like all these choices have to be made, and I have to deal with them all, whatever they may be. And so, in that process, I think I've just sort of let go of an idea of who I am, and just sort of accepted whoever I am on that sort of day. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Amy Lynn. I'm an event producer in the region, but have deep ties to hospitality industry and food sovereignty issues and things of that nature. And, I used to live in New York City and was very involved in doing work around urban farming, urban gardening. Mm-hmm. And I look around Denver and I see that it's in a great state of transition. And I really appreciate what you said just recently about letting go. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what it would take to make Denver, the city center, be a greener place, and maybe even explore some of the language that you would use to help people in their transition to what will ideally be a more sustainable and equitable city.
No, I think that's a really good question. I think it's important to recognize that we are doing quite a bit as a city and as a state. I think we can always do more, but if you look at it nationally, like the leadership that we've had has been very progressively minded in this regard. I think the history of sort of conquerors in this place has been one of creating a mentality around scarcity. And so you have like sort of the history of the West as told by those conquerors of like boom and bust, and sort of make hay while you can. And I think we're sort of settling into like, okay, how do we actually build this the way, people who used to live here, who actually discovered this place, like lived. And I think that with regard to, sustainability broadly, our climate goals are ambitious, and I think we are doing a really good job of meeting them. With regard to food and to urban farming, it's a really complex question, and it gets back to what I touched on in terms of like what the industrial agricultural system did was create productive labor. Like, follow the money. It's very difficult to solve a lot of the sustainability issues that we have, particularly as it relates to food, until we reshape a neoliberal design of an economy in service of finance and create a new narrative and a new story of an economy in service to life. And actually, interestingly enough, if you read about neoliberal, like environmentalism sort of came around, especially like started in the 60s, whatever, modern environmentalism. And then 2000s sort of hit steam. And then you had sort of armchair scientists. But I think you're gonna have armchair economists. Is like you start digging. Like the thing is you start digging into this. You're like, I can't solve a lot of the problems we have unless we rethink the economy. And so in terms of like food, it's right now the difficult thing is like economically speaking, urban farms, the way that with what we're competing against, like it's very difficult. It's hard to make sense. What's intriguing and exciting about cannabis is that controlled environment agriculture is something that like can make that argument more economically sound, and it wouldn't have advanced as quickly had it not been for a crop selling for $1,300 a pound instead of $1. So like that's promising, but I think it's a really nuanced. It's really nuanced, and I think the environmental movement is going to understand that like the connection between the economy and our values there and that are intertwined, and we have to be like, and the current economic paradigm that we have was a very conscious construct, and so we have to be very conscious in designing something else. So tonight, actually ironically enough, it's called a Finer Future Forum. Hunter Lovins is sort of putting it together, but there are movements in this direction of like, okay, if we were to design an economy in service of life, what would those tenets look like? How can we get into the chambers of commerce and universities the same way that neoliberals did? How can we, design something that's different and makes sense? So it took a long time for neoliberalism to be the dominant system, and I think it's going to take a long time to upend it too. But all the signs are there of the need to do it. So I just think, it's complex. It's like, that's my view on it, but I don't know my head from my behind.
My name is Robin Hill. I have Bags by Robin. I'm just curious, you touched on who your target customer is. Who is your market competition?
Oh, for soil? It's been really intriguing. Like, what's really intriguing about cannabis is that it's a $50 billion market. It's a black market. Like, it's been it's not like it wasn't here. It wasn't like it was just created. And it wasn't like there wasn't people growing it, right? Like, so, but the people growing it, it's the only plant that hasn't been studied or grown by people historically who actually knew how to grow anything. So then the product providers were like, how can we help these people who actually don't know how to grow anything, grow stuff, right? And, and like that was like the dominant thing. And then you're like, you're earning 200% like what? Like, and then you're like, and then what was unique for us is we got to see literally in Colorado, growers move from the basement into, 200,000 square foot facilities and grow into companies. And we're like, what's still missing is it's not federally legal or studied, and it's too small and risky of a market for conventional agricultural companies to want to participate. But the hobby we'll call it hobby, product producers, it's still the bulk of the market is this illicit market. And so they don't want to change anything, and they're earning criminal margins for a criminal enterprise, but like it's legal, and now we need sort of like products that fit their needs. And so we're in this unique place of like being in Colorado because it's state by state, like, we got to see and benefit from like the first breed of this new type of customer and figure out their needs. And as we roll out to new states, each state follows this sort of trend of maturing and after legalization. So the customers are new breeds of companies like ours that are sort of recognizing this need. But the bulk of the market is companies that already existed to service the illegal side of the market. And so we have a gap and a window that we can exploit here quickly. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
All right, so just one more. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you all so much for your questions. Those were really, really interesting questions, and I think advanced the discussion big time. Okay, so just give us one action item that we can walk out of here with, and then we'll wrap things up.
Be kind to yourself.
Short and sweet. I love it. Can we give it up for JP?
Oh, and 555-888 CTR. Yeah.
Yes, text CTR to 555-888.
Yeah, and then follow the link and vote for us.
Yeah, and then do the link, vote for Coaltown Revival.
Coaltown Reunion.
Coaltown Reunion is banned. Thank you all so much for coming to the Leadership Spotlight Series. We appreciate you using your lunch hour to learn more about entrepreneurship in our community, and we encourage you to visit the Commons website to learn more about future events. Thank you so much, JP.